man caught in a flood climbed up onto his housetop and prayed to God, "Lord, save me." Well, a little while later, along came someone in a canoe and offered him a ride. But he responded, "No, no, the Lord will save me." Sometime later, then, a motorboat came by telling him to climb in. He responded, "No, the Lord's going to save me." And then sometime later, there was a helicopter that flew over, dropped a line, and called down for him to climb aboard. But once again, he responded, "No, the Lord will save me." Well, the flood waters continued to rise and he drowned. In heaven, he asked the Lord, why didn't you answer my prayer?" To which the Lord responded, "Well, I sent you a canoe, a motorboat, and a helicopter. What more did you want?" You know, sometimes we are so busy looking for God to part the waters, as it were, or provide some other miraculous answer, that we miss God's obvious provision. God chose to use people like you and me to accomplish his tasks. He gave the Great Commission for spreading the good news. And likewise, we don't have to do something extravagant or unusual to serve God. God calls us to serve him in very ordinary tasks. Proverbs 3:27 and 28 instructs us, "Never walk away from someone who deserves help. Your hand is God's hand for that person." Don't tell your neighbor, "Maybe some other time," or "Try me tomorrow," when the money's right there in your pocket. So we begin, first of all, by seeing that we shouldn't withhold good. We're called to do good whenever we have the opportunity to help. Don't walk away. Don't turn your back. Jesus told the story of the rich man and Lazarus to illustrate this fact. Lazarus, in the story, was a poor beggar, sick and diseased and unable to work, and so he begged outside of the rich man's place. The rich man walked by him day after day, but gave him no help. He thought only of himself. When the rich man died, he went to Hades, a place of suffering. So tragic was his fate, so dishonorable his life, that we're not even given his name. Never walk away from someone who deserves help. Now, the writer of Proverbs provides some guidance with the words, "who deserves help." Lazarus begged because in that society there was no other recourse for the handicapped or those too sick to work. There were no government aid programs. There are many in our society who are trying, but because of circumstances beyond their control, need extra help. And when we see the homeless people on the streets of our cities, it's easy to jump to judge them as we hurry by. Perhaps we need to take time to maybe talk to them, get acquainted, find out why they're homeless. Let's be quick to help those who lack the resources that they need to provide for themselves. We are God's hand for that person. Jesus himself set the example. He went about constantly doing good for others. And even when he tried to get away for some rest, he didn't tell the crowd who looked him up, "Come back later, I'm on vacation." No, he ministered to them right then. Secondly, we're told not to procrastinate. Don't procrastinate. That is, we should help right away when someone needs help. We shouldn't put it off. Sometimes we don't want to be inconvenienced. Sometimes we're hoping that if we say later, they won't bother us again. Well, the Lord tells us not to put off doing good and helping others. There's a story of a farm boy years ago who accidentally overturned his wagon load of corn on the road. His neighbor came by and said, after he looked at it, "Hey, Willis, just leave it there. Forget your troubles for a spell. It's just about dinner time, so come in and have dinner with us, and then after that, I'll help you get your wagon up." "Well, that's mighty nice of you," Willis answered, "but I don't think Pa would like me to." "Ah, come on, son," the farmer insisted, kept pressing him, and finally the boy said, Okay, but Pa won't like it." Well, they had dinner, and after that wonderful dinner, Willis thanked his host and said, "I feel a lot better now, but I just know Pa is going to be really upset." "Oh, don't worry, don't be foolish," exclaimed his neighbor. "By the way, where is he?" "He's under the wagon." So when we delay doing good, we never know who might be under the wagon, as it were. When God gives us an opportunity to help someone in need, let us not neglect it or say, "I'll do it some other time." This is your time. And thirdly, you are God's hand. The scriptures make it clear that we are God's representatives for doing good. Never walk away from someone who deserves help. Your hand is God's hand for that person. We are God's hands and feet in this world. He desires to use us to minister to others and to bring His love and grace to them. Most times it's in little things that we may serve as His hands and feet. I remember as a young man traveling out to seminary in Portland, Oregon. I stopped in Vancouver after a long 15-hour drive through the mountains. And I tried to call a minister who I knew from Ontario. He had served there and then moved to BC to pastor. But there was no answer. Rather deflated, I decided, well, I'll call another pastor from our denomination who's in the area and ask him about this other minister. Well, when I did so, he informed me that that man was away on holidays. But then he asked me about why I was calling, and I told him, and he invited me to stay at his home. Reverend Joseph James and his wife were wonderful hosts. They were God's hand to me, a young man 3,000 miles from home, traveling on a shoestring budget in a strange city where the only person I knew wasn't home. Perhaps you have performed some small kindness for another and forgot all about it, but they remind you of it the next time you see them. To you it wasn't much, but to them it was a very significant and encouraging act. Reverend Martin Higginbottom relates something that occurred when he was still a teen. He came home to find his mother sitting at the kitchen table talking to a homeless man. Apparently, she had met him on the street while she was shopping and had invited him home for a warm meal. The man commented, "I wish there were more people in the world like you." Higginbottom's mother responded, Oh, there are. You just have to look for them." And the homeless man simply shook his head and replied, "But I didn't look for you. You looked for me." In 1892, at Stanford University, 18-year-old Herbert Hoover was struggling to pay his fees. And as an orphan, he had no family to turn to. So he and a friend decided to host a musical concert in hopes of raising their tuition money. They hired the world-famous pianist Ignacy Paderewski. His manager, in arranging things, demanded a guarantee fee of $2,000 for the recital. Paderewski performed, but Hoover and his friend had only managed to make $1,600 in ticket sales. After the concert, they gave him the entire $1,600 with a promise to send the remainder as soon as possible. But Paderewski returned the money to them and told them, deduct your expenses, deduct what you need for tuition, and then give me what's left. Sometime later, Paderewski became Prime Minister of Poland. And during World War I, Poland was ravaged, and 1.5 million people were starving and had no money to feed them. The country had no money to feed them. Paderewski reached out to the U.S. Food and Relief Administration for help. It was Herbert Hoover that was now the head of that department. Hoover agreed to help and quickly arranged to ship tons of food grains to feed the starving Polish people. When a grateful Paderewski met Hoover to thank him personally, Hoover reminded him of how he had helped 2 young college students pay their fees, stating, "I was one of those 2. Paderewski was God's hand to Hoover, and later Hoover would be God's hand to him. Fourthly, we come to the point of being God's hand. The words of the wise men make it clear that we are to be God's hand to those who are in need. But how? How can we be God's hand? How do we make that part of our essence, of who we are? Being God's hand to others starts from within. It is what you call living inside out. I believe the song Hands and Feet from the group Audio Adrenaline captures it well. But first, in Romans 12, we read, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what is God's will, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." The song Hands and Feet states, "I've abandoned every selfish thought. I've surrendered everything I've got. You can have everything I am." That's what Paul is talking about when he speaks of offering our bodies as living sacrifices to the Lord, ones that are fully surrendered to doing what he wants. This is accomplished by rejecting the urge and pressure to copy the way the world does things. But instead it means surrendering our wills to God, allowing him to transform us by changing the way we think. This relates to every area of life. But in terms of service, it means letting God root out our natural selfishness and replace it with a heart for others. We might question whether we really love others and question our motives for doing some act of kindness. But I like what C.S. Lewis states about that. He says, "Don't waste your time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you do. As soon as you do this, you find one of life's great secrets. When you are behaving as if you love someone, you will presently come to love him. If you injure someone you dislike, you will find yourself disliking him more. If you do him a good turn, you will find yourself disliking him less." As the Audio Adrenaline song states, "You can have everything I am and perfect everything I'm not." As God does his transforming work within us, then our acts of service, our desire to help others, will not be the result of peer pressure or guilt feelings, but will come from our hearts, from the inside out. I think of the politician William Wilberforce, who is known primarily for fighting to end the slave trade and slavery in the late 18th and early 19th century. But he constantly opened his home for meals to the poor and to beggars. And this came from within, from a desire to help his neighbor. He never walked away from someone who needed help. He was God's hand to those people. So while some people look to God to help them in miraculous ways or use them in miraculous ways, like the man on the rooftop, God usually works through regular people like you and me in the ordinary events of life. And so Jesus calls us as his followers to help those who are in genuine need, and not to delay that help when it's in our power to serve. This might take the form of a team of young people on serving on a mission trip, or it could be you helping an injured neighbor by volunteering to cut his grass or help out with some meals. It could be helping an unemployed family pay some bills. And there's really no end to the opportunities and the options for help. With the help of God's Spirit, let's live from the inside out. Let's be God's hand to others as he calls us to. May God bless you.